Book of Ezekiel, it's a prophet in the Old Testament. Back past Psalms and Isaiah and keep going and you'll find it there. It's not one. Matter of fact, I was teasing somebody the other day and said, when was the last time, they were telling me, when's the last time you ever heard a preacher preach out of Revelation? I said, when's the last time you heard a preacher preach out of Ezekiel? Well, you get your chance today. Ezekiel chapter 3. Every so often in church I have somebody come up to me before church begins and they'll say, Pastor, now I'm waiting for a phone call. It's kind of important. So if I get up and leave, don't be offended. You haven't said anything. I just need to take that call. And so, I appreciate that because I watch y'all. You guys are watching me, but I watch you. And, you sometimes wonder when somebody's sitting there all of a sudden and they get up and walk out and you, oh my gosh, what did I say? What did I do? So I appreciate those warnings, Somebody will say, well, Pastor, I got to leave for work at such and such time. So if I get up and just walk out, okay, good. Because, I'm a sensitive kind of guy. Okay? And you get up and trot out, I'm going to be a little bit worried. Did I say something? Did I do something? Am I zipped up? Is everything okay? So I appreciate those warnings, but it's still, even if they don't leave, even if the call never comes, it's interesting to watch them, and you know what I'm talking about because you've done this. When somebody says, well, I'll call you, like, let's say it's the doctor. The doctor says, well, I'll call you Tuesday morning, and let you know the results of the tests. Tell me what sort of day Tuesday morning is. Yeah, rough. I mean, you're sitting there every little, is that phone? You'll hear the phone on the TV, you'll grab it. I mean, you're just like hyper tuned. I think the neighbor's house 3 doors down, the phone could ring and you'd be on it, You're kind of like, there, but you're not really there. Your mind is just preoccupied with the doctor said he's going to call Tuesday morning. If my doctor ever says that, I say, give me a time. Don't tell me Tuesday morning. Tuesday morning starts at midnight. That's a big window, Tell me you'll call between such and such and such and such. Because, that tends to drive your life. Well, I want you to think about that as we take a look at the idea of God speaking. We're going to be looking at this theme over the next however many weeks that we do this. But the idea that God speaks. Here in Ezekiel's a prophet in the 6th century. And if you're familiar with your Bible history, and if not, I'll bring you up to speed. During the 6th century BC, and it's BC, before Christ. I don't go for any of that crazy BCE stuff you see nowadays. Before the current era, they use that. If you look at history books or whatever, they'll say, in 1945 CE, current era. They don't use AD anymore. They'll say in 325 BCE, before the current era. They want to get away from saying before Christ or in the year of our Lord. What I find interesting is they still use his birth. They don't go, okay, well, let's refigure it from something else. They don't want to use the words. I still use the words. Okay? So in the 6th century before Christ, Ezekiel was a prophet in the southern kingdom. The kingdoms had split. They couldn't get along like most people. And they had split, and the northern kingdom of Israel had been carried away into captivity a number of years before. And Ezekiel was a prophet to the people in the southern kingdom. God spoke to him. He was in captivity in Babylon, and one day while he was sitting there, God spoke to him and gave him a message to give to the southern tribes. Now, how God spoke and all of that, I don't want you to get all focused on right now. I just want you to camp out with me for a moment and think about the idea of God speaking. The idea that going through life, God speaks. Listen to what Ezekiel had to say. Verse 1 of chapter 3. Then he, speaking of Yahweh, said to me, Son of man, eat what you find, eat this scroll, and go speak to the house of Israel. So I opened my mouth, and he fed me this scroll, and he said to me, Son of man, feed your stomach, and fill your body with this scroll which I am giving you. Then I ate it, and it was sweet as honey in my mouth. And then he said to me, Son of man, go to the house of Israel. Speak my words to them. For you are not being sent to a people of unintelligible speech or difficult language, but to the house of Israel. Nor to many people of unintelligible speech or difficult language, whose words you can't understand, but I have sent you to them try that again. But I have sent you to them who should listen to you. Yet the house of Israel will not be willing to listen to you, since they're not willing to listen to me. Surely the whole house of Israel is stubborn and obstinate. Behold, I have made your face as hard as their faces, and your forehead as hard as their forehead. Like emery harder than flint, I have made your forehead. Do not be afraid of them, or be dismayed before them, though they are a rebellious house. Moreover, he said to me, Son of man, take into your heart all my words, which I will speak to you, and listen closely. Go to the exiles, to the sons of your people, and speak to them, and tell them whether they listen or not. Thus says Yahweh God. Now again, I don't want you to, the temptation in this passage is to, try to break down, well, what is this and what is that and why this and why that. I want you to entertain, just for the notion, the idea that God speaks. The very thought that in the midst of life, in the midst of going through your day, that God would speak is a mystical and an ethereal event. It's kind of like Bill Cosby said that, here's Noah one day, and all of a sudden you hear this, bing, Noah. Oh my gosh, what was that? This idea that, what would it be like were God to move and to reach down through humanity and to say something to me? Oh, this is just a phenomenal event. Well, yeah, I would agree it's a phenomenal event, but let me tell you something. It's not so outlandish as you might think. While it was a pretty big thing for Ezekiel there, you don't hear him going, what? Excuse me? Come again? I mean, he doesn't stop and, freak out and go running off into the darkness saying, oh my goodness, God has spoken to me. To him, it came as a matter of just life. This was God's first reaching out to him. And he takes it in course like any other conversation. So I wanted to think, like I said, I think if we kind of say, well, God speaks, we get a little bit, heady because we're not quite sure what that might look like. Let's just think about, like we were talking earlier, about if anyone were to speak to us. If somebody were to tell you, you know what, I'm going to give you a call. I don't know when, but I'm going to give you a call. And what that would look like in your life. One thing, I think there's anticipation. I think if somebody were to tell you, a friend of yours, somebody that you care about, somebody maybe you haven't heard from for a long time, if they were to tell you that they were going to call, I think there'd be a spirit of anticipation in your heart, don't you? And my friend's going to call me. I don't know when, but they said this week they're going to call me. It was really great to get that letter from them. They said they're going to call me. I'm really, 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 really looking forward to this. So you wait. You're anticipating. You're almost hoping that this person's going to call you. I believe that the testimony of Scripture is that God still speaks. I believe that he is demonstrated throughout the entirety of the Bible, that in a multitude of circumstances, amongst a multitude of places, which is what we will look at in the coming weeks, that God has been willing to make himself known and to speak to humanity, and nowhere have I found that God has all of a sudden said, you know what, I'm going to stop doing that. Matter of fact, I believe the Bible's pretty clear that God says he's going to continue to do that. I just don't think that we expect it. I think that we point a finger and we go, oh, well, that was for then, that's not for now. That was for people like that wasn't for people like this. You don't know Ezekiel. You don't know what sort of man he was. Where's it at? I found this hilarious. I was preparing this week, and I was reading about Ezekiel Ezekiel the priest, verse 3. Ezekiel the priest, the son of Buzi. How'd you like to have a dad named Buzi? You know, he's an everyday sort of guy. You know, he's not. I mean, he's a priest, but you know, he's out working. You know, by a ditch. It says by the river Chelbar, but you know, Babylon is a lot like Arizona. We don't have rivers here. We have washes that have water in them for periods of time. I mean, he was out by a ditch, out by an irrigation canal, doing something, and God spoke to him. He's just an everyday sort of guy. I think that we point fingers and say, well, if I was only somebody like Ezekiel, maybe God would speak. You are somebody like Ezekiel. God still speaks. We just don't look for it. We don't anticipate that, you know what? Maybe, just maybe, God might have something to say to me today. God might speak. If we did, we might have a little more anticipation. I know in my prayer time, I'm guilty of saying this. I'll say, Lord, speak to me today. You know, and it hit me one morning. I thought, you probably are speaking. I'm just not hearing. So I started saying, all right, Lord, help me to hear you today. Help me to have that anticipation that, you know what? God to speak. Oh man, maybe today. When there's that anticipation, we're also a little bit guilty of tuning out. This is what I mean. I have one ear turned toward what I'm hoping to hear, and one ear turned toward what's going on. You know, it's kind of like husbands doing the football games on. You know, they got one ear and a half toward the football game, and the rest of it toward their wife, and they're going, If you ever want to see a really interesting sight, watch a man watching a football game listening to his wife. His eyes go like this. One's that way, one's this way. Strangest sight in the world. Okay? We've got this almost detached, kind of distracted thing going on, you know, where we're listening to the wife, but we're also listening because we don't want to miss what's going on in the game. And that's the way we are. If somebody says, you know, say you're at the park or something, and you're going about what you're doing, and your child says, you know, I'm going to go off over here. You moms do this. You've got part of you focused on what's going on, and the other part is over there watching the kid, right? And you're listening, you know. It's like you got one eye here, one eye there, one eye there. Yeah, you guys got more than one eye. I mean, I know that. Got them in the back of your head. You know everything that's going on. You've almost got this distracted, kind of divided attention going on. When we expect somebody to speak, we're anticipating it, we're listening for it. So it kind of distracts us a little bit from the things of this world. I appreciate what Scott had to say during our prayer this morning about the political season, because you know what? That's very distracting to me. I mean, I listen to the news and I watch the shows, and it's gotten to the point where I turn them off because it's consuming my sight too much. It's consuming my attention too much. I don't need to be so locked on what's going on in this world that I can't hear from God. I need to get into that position where I can say, okay, God, I'm aware of what's going on, but I'm not consumed by it. I'm not dismissing it, but I'm also not, you know, overwhelmed by it. I'm listening to you as well. So I've got this divided thing going on. I hear what's going on, but I can hear from you as well. And it creates this characteristic that's known of people with whom God speaks, that they almost seem to have one foot in one world and one foot in another. So if we have this idea that God speaks, we're going to be listening, we're going to be attuned that way, almost to the point of appearing distracted from the world that's going on. You ever seen that happen on news reports, where the reporter's talking and it seems like, you know, he's hearing voices in his head? It's because he is. He's got an earpiece. And they go, oh, it's this, and then he'll say that. You think they know all that stuff. They got a brain trust that's telling them all that stuff. So when we see that when God speaks, you know, or I'm sorry, when people speak, we can identify with it. I mean, we know what it's like to walk through life expecting somebody else to speak. And I don't think that it's any different with God, that we can go through this life and we can expect, we can anticipate that God is speaking, and we can tune out maybe a little bit of what's going on in the world in order to hear Him, and we can almost be willing to appear distracted by other people because we're listening as well to God. I was at a conference one time, and this guy cracked me up. I mean, he just cracked me up. At first, I thought he was suffering old-timers disease. He was talking, and every so often he'd kind of get his look in his eye, and he'd kind of pause for a minute, and I'm thinking, hello, and then he'd get back on track, and I thought, oh Lord, don't let me be like that, and then I realized he was talking to the Lord. He was talking to the Lord right there. And I remember stopping and pausing, going, you dog, you're talking to him right now, aren't you? And I said, let me be like that. Let me be willing to look like a person who's maybe not all there, because part of me is with Him. Can we be willing to do that? Can we be willing to transfer that sort of thing to the Lord and to say, you know what, Father, I want to walk in a relationship with You to where I'm willing to invest that extra effort to be attentive to Your voice. When we look at Ezekiel's encounter with God, I think there's a few things in particular that we can pull from this to help us in hearing God in our own life. I think the first thing that's important to note, and this undergirds everything that I'm having to say, God's willing to talk to humanity. God demonstrates in His Word, and particularly in the case of Ezekiel, that He's willing to talk to man. You don't get this sense that God says, you know what, all right, if I got to, I got to. If you're going to make me, I will. You get this sense that with freedom of heart, with a generous willingness, God's willing to speak to mankind. That's a pretty marvelous thing, isn't it? That the God of the universe, the God of all creation, is willing to speak with humanity. Listen to what it says in the book of Romans. Romans 8:16. It says, the Spirit, speaking of the Holy Spirit of God, the Spirit Himself testifies with our spirit that we are children of God. God's Spirit is willing to speak to our hearts to affirm to us that we're His children. Over in the book of James, he reminds us, James 1:5, says, if any man lacks wisdom, let him figure it out for himself. No, wait a minute, that's not what it says. Hold on. No, you know how it goes. If any man lacks wisdom, what? Let him ask of God. Okay, that doesn't promise any answer, right? It doesn't stop there. What does it say after that? Who gives? Who answers? And who doesn't criticize for asking? So, James even says, just point blank, hey, if you're lacking understanding, you're lacking wisdom, go ahead and ask God. He'll answer. He'll give you what you're looking for. And He won't ridicule you for doing it. Lord, should I do this? How many times do I got to tell you? You asked this before. I like the parable that Jesus shared of the man and his neighbor who had the guests. And he came knocking on the neighbor's door, and the neighbor said, I've already put my kids to bed, and I've already locked the door, leave me alone. And he kept at it, and he kept at it, and says that the man finally gets up and answers just because he wants the man to shut up. He says, if man will do that, how much more will God answer when you pray? We don't have to beg Him. I'm not saying begging God's wrong, but we don't have to beg Him. We don't have to pester Him. We don't have to set our hair on fire to get his attention. He invites us. He shows the willingness to communicate with you and I. What would that do to your life? To understand that it's not just a matter of the big things, but that in the everyday affairs of life, God has invited you to speak with him, and he has said, I will speak with you. Might approach the way that we go throughout our day. Another thing that I notice as I read through Ezekiel is that God's plenty able to make himself clear to Ezekiel. He said to Ezekiel, eat what you find, take this scroll, go to the house of Israel, tell them what I'm about to tell you. Listen to what I'm saying to you. He doesn't look at him and say, now for sure, badig de brog dig. And you go, what? Sounds like that chef off of, the Muppets. He didn't go, huh? What? What are you saying? I don't quite get it. Huh? God is able to clearly communicate to Ezekiel what it is that he has to say. Now, I want you to understand that what I'm about to say is God speaks our language. And I'm not talking English or Spanish or Swahili, though he does do that. Okay? I mean, God does speak our language. To me, it is amazing to think that in this very instant, amongst every tribe and tongue in the world, God is able to speak to them in their language. I mean, to the Russians, he communicates in Russian. To the English, he communicates in English. I think that's pretty cool. I mean, I know what it says when you know two languages. You're bilingual and trilingual. What if you know them all? You're panlingual, I guess. But it's more than that. It's more than that God knows our language. God is able to speak to us in a way that we can understand. God does not come to those who are incapable of understanding high functioning thought and throw things out at him and they go, I don't get it. He's able to break it down to the infant and help them to understand in the way that they can understand. When I pray for people, I often will pray that. I'll say, Lord, please, I'll pick on Fred. Please help Fred to understand in a way that is particular to him what it is that you're saying. Because what clicks for me may not click for Fred, and what clicks for Fred may not click for me because I'm thick. I only miss the obvious, okay? So, I kind of need God to, really make it clear to me and to convey it to me in a way that fits with me. Now, I wouldn't expect God to do that to you because you're not me. So please don't expect God to speak to me like he speaks to you. Sometimes people will share something really phenomenal, some way that God has moved on their heart or spoken into their life, and they'll share it and you'll go, so? That's them. God is speaking in a way that they can relate to. When he came to Ezekiel in a time, in a culture, in a disposition that Ezekiel went, I get it. We read it and we go, what's this scroll stuff? What's he talking about? I don't quite get why he's saying eat this. Well, Ezekiel had no problem with it. That's the big part of Revelation that is so confusing to people. Is we read Revelation 2,000 years after it was written, in a time and a space, in a situation, to a people, and John went, I got it, no problem. And we go, I don't quite get it. Understand that God speaks your language. When he wants you to understand, you'll have no trouble understanding. You ever sit in an algebra class? I did. Seven times. Not counting college. The same class. I took it in junior high for 2 years, failed it. I took it in high school for 4 semesters, and I failed it. My definition of algebra is this. The purpose of algebra is to determine the value of x. Right? The only problem is once you figure out the value of x, then change it. If you enjoy this, you'll enjoy beating your head against a brick wall. That's how I felt about it. Don't talk to me about algebra. I mean, it made no sense to me. So why would God come and try to convey his heart that he's willing to convey in a manner that I'm not going to get? He won't do it. God will not call you up and speak to you in Swahili any more than he would talk over your head. He comes to us in a language that we can understand. Not only that, as I look at Ezekiel, when God speaks, there's a certainty that it's him. If you look through that passage that we said, matter of fact, take a look at a couple others with me. Go to Ezekiel 1:3. Take a look at what it says there. It says, the word of Yahweh came expressly to Ezekiel the priest, the son of Buzi, in the land of the Chaldeans by the river Chebar, and there the hand of Yahweh came upon him. No doubt in his mind. No doubt in his mind at all who it was. If you take a look over in, where is it? 1-5. Then he said to me, Son of man, stand on your feet that I may speak to you. As he spoke to me, the Spirit entered me and set me on my feet, and I heard him speaking to me. Then he said to me, Son of man, I am sending you to the sons of Israel, to a rebellious people who rebelled against me. They and their fathers have transgressed against me to this very day. I am sending you to them who are stubborn and obstinate children, and you may say to them, Thus says Yahweh God. As for them, whether they listen or not, for they are a rebellious house, they will know that a prophet has been amongst them. In that passage, in 4 verses, he uses the word said, speak, heard, or say repeatedly. He had no doubt at all that it was God speaking to him. He didn't go, is this just me? Am I losing my mind? Hey, Joe, come out behind that rock and stop jacking around with me. He didn't have any doubt at all. I mean, not only is God able to convey what he wants to say clearly, you know that it's God. I've had folks say to me, well, how do you know when the Lord's speaking to you? How do you know it's not your little voice? So, well, my little voice usually tells me to go hurt my neighbor. I don't know about you. No, I'm just kidding. When God makes himself known, you know that it's God. I can't explain that to you. I mean, it's not like God shows up, flashes his ID and says, this is God. It's not like as if somehow there's bright lights and, accordion music or something. I can't explain it to you. But at the core of your being, you know that this person who is speaking is God. It's kind of like if you were to get a call from the White House and you hear the president, you know him on TV, and you hear that voice on the phone. You go, my God, who's president of the United States? Why he's calling you, I want to know. But that's beside the point. There's just this certainty that God has made himself known to you. You know that you know that you know. Ezekiel knew. I wonder if maybe for a moment he paused, like Paul did, looked around, went, anyone else hear this? But when it came down to it, he said, you know what? This is God. And maybe you and I might need time to stop and to pause and to go, what was that? What was going on? Because get this. This is important to know. God is not so concerned about what he has to say as he's concerned that you hear what he has to say. You get the difference? Sometimes we think that God is all about conveying information and, he wants us to know things. Okay? Hey, I got a word from God, Yeah, right. Get the jacket quick. God is concerned that we know him. He wants you to hear him. At the end of the day, he doesn't want you to be able to say, I know what it was that God said to me, as much as you can say, I know that God has said to me. And sometimes that requires that we sit down and we spend some time before him and go, Okay, God, what is it that you're revealing? So we see that God is willing to speak. We see that he's willing to make himself known. We see that he wants us to hear his voice, to interact with him. But we also see that there's a clarity in the communication on God's part, and there's a clarity of understanding on Ezekiel's. God could convey it very clear. He knew what he wanted to say. He could say it in a way that Ezekiel would register with Ezekiel, and then we see that indeed Ezekiel did understand. Okay? No, hear me. You can understand the God of the universe. Yeah, I think that's pretty cool. I mean, have you ever talked to a physicist? Oh my gosh. It's like, dude, get out of your office. You know? It's like talking to some theologians and they throw out these words and these phrases and I'm going, dude, nobody else lives there. Come on out and play with the rest of us. You know? They throw all these phrases around. You go to the doctor and doctor uses these terms with you. You know why doctors use big medical terms? They spend a lot of money. They got to show you they did something. So they throw out, polytheistic, whatever. You go, huh? And then they go, well, this is what it means. Thanks, doc. But he's got to show you he knows it. I don't like talking to people that are smarter than me. They give me a headache. It's almost like you kind of need cheat notes. Okay, wait a minute. I'll get you. All right. That's what I like about a Kindle. If you have a Kindle, that if there's a word in there you don't understand, you highlight it, it'll define it. I wish people came with that button. It's like, what are you saying? God doesn't do that. We can understand God. Now, let me back off of that just a little bit. Can God make your brain melt? In a heartbeat. Okay? I'm not saying that you can contain God. I'm not saying that you can know all there is to know about God. But when God speaks to you, you can understand. Not only does he come to us in a way that we relate, but he has given us, in being created in his image, he has given us the capacity to be able to connect with him and understand him. That is the essence of what being in the image of God is. I can connect with God. When God speaks, I can hear his voice. I can understand what it is that he has to say to me. That's an amazing thing. God's not going to ask me to do something that I can't do. Not only that, not only can I understand, but I possess the capacity to respond to it. Ezekiel heard God, he understood God, and he was able to respond to God. Okay, God, sure, all right. Or maybe you ought to send somebody else. That was Moses' excuse, right? What about Aaron? Somebody else in line? And you'll see some of that in the Bible. You'll see sometimes that God speaks and the people may struggle a little bit, but they struggle in an exchange with God. They don't throw their hands up and go, I don't get it at all. Though there are cases of that, and we'll explain why that is when we get there. But usually a person who's in a relationship with God hears God's voice and is then able to respond to what God has to say. The book of Hebrews in chapter 4 tells us that we do not have a high priest who is unfamiliar with our situation, that doesn't know how it is that we feel. Likewise, in the book of Romans, in the 8th chapter, it tells us that the Spirit of God residing within us makes intercession with groanings when we're at a lack of words. So even in those times that we can't even verbalize what it is that we feel, we're still able to respond to God. You ever been there? You ever literally been to that point of just loss of words? You go, somebody looks at you and says, spit it out. God doesn't say that. This is the Spirit of God's presence in the life of the believer it makes intercession, and God goes, I hear your heart. I know what you're saying. Isn't it great to know that God speaks? Isn't it great to know that not only does God speak, but that you can hear and you can respond? That it's not, this idea of this great, phenomenal mushroom cloud event that blows you away, but it's communication just like it is with another person. Doesn't that change the way? Doesn't it hold the potential to change the way that you enter into a new day? Assuming, let's go back to the beginning, that we walk through life with that anticipation. That we go through life with, that almost kind of tuned out here, but tuned in there, living in both worlds, almost appearing to be distracted, because we know that God speaks, and we're listening for God to speak, so that when God speaks, we can grab that and say, I know what you're saying. And we can respond to what it is that He's saying. Isn't that a great thing? In the coming weeks, we're going to kind of take a look at what God's speaking looks like. And I don't mean to give you a box and say this is how it always looks. But I want to pull out some examples of God speaking that we might learn from it, and how that it might look like